This is the solution for the exercise in lesson 23. The instructions are as follows. We'll create a web form application that has two text boxes, a button, which we'll set to the word multiply on this label, and a label control. When a user enters two numbers and clicks the multiply button, display the product, in other words, multiply the two numbers into the label control. So to begin with, we will go to File, New Project. Make sure we have Visual Basic Project selected, and we'll also select ASP.NET Web Application. And we'll change the name of this to Lesson 23 Exercise. And so I'm going to go through some of the steps pretty quickly because we've covered a lot of these topics in the text and in the video for Lesson 23. So the first thing we'll do is go to our toolbox, make sure we're on our Web Forms tab of our toolbox, and start dragging over the text boxes we'll need, the button, and then also a label control, which I'll format a little bit. Select all these items and move them over. Let's change this to multiply. And then let's also take a moment to change the names of all the text boxes and the controls. I'll go ahead and pause while I do this so you don't have to watch me type. And so I simply changed the ID for each of these to text number 1, or txt number 1, txt number 2, btn multiply, and lbl result for the label. The next thing we want to do is double-click our multiply button and write some code there. And the code we'll write should look something like this. Now I'm going to do this all in one line of code. You can split this out in a couple lines of code if you'd like to. Either way, it'll work the same. The first thing is that I'm going to use the cint function twice. And the first time it's going to wrap around the txt number 1 dot text value. So it's going to convert it from a string into an integer that can be multiplied. And the same thing will be true here for text number 2. And then once those numbers are multiplied together, number 2, then what we'll want to do is convert it back into a string so that it can be represented correctly in our label. So we'll go cstring, and we'll wrap that all the way around here. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and test our application now. And after a moment, our web form comes up. Let's type in a couple numbers. Let's type in 3 and 5. And it returns 15. So now let's go ahead and play around with this a little bit, and I'm going to remove the number 5 from the second text box and click the multiply button, and I get an exception, which is input string was not in a correct format. So one way to do this is that I could just wrap a try-catch around this line of code here, or I could kind of adopt that philosophy that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this really addresses the bonus section of the exercise, which is use validation controls to make sure that the user enters something into each text box before clicking the multiply button, and that the user only enters numerical values. Let's tackle the first part of that. I'm going to go to my toolbox and scroll down a little bit within the Web Forms tab, and I'm going to pluck off here this required field validator and put it next to my txt number 1. I'm going to change the error message to just a star, and I'm also going to set the name to req number 1 to kind of match it up with the text box. The last thing I need to do is actually associate it in the control to validate property with that text box, so txt number 1. I'm going to do the same thing for txt number 2. So here, let's grab a required field validator, put it right next to our text box. We're going to change the error message to a star, which gives the user a some type of visual cue that they forgot to enter information in that text box. We'll put REQ number 2. And finally, we're going to associate this with txt number 2 by setting the control to validate property to the appropriate control. And let's save this and then try running this application now and see what occurs. Let's not type anything to either text box and click multiply, and notice that we do get the little asterisks that come up and indicate that we need to fill in some data. And it works. Okay, so the next part of this exercise is to use validation controls to ensure that the user only enters numerical values. So we'll use a different type of validation control for that. And what we'll want to do is use the compare validator, and we're going to have to set a couple properties on this. First of all, I'm going to set the name to com for compare validator. I could do CV or something along those lines as well. And then number 1. The next thing I want to set is the type. What we want to do is check to make sure that this is an integer value that's being typed in by the user. And we'll also want to, in the control to validate, we'll want to select txt number 1. I think that's all the settings that I need. I probably need to set the error message too. And I'll go ahead and set that to something like numbers only. And let me make sure that this one works. I didn't forget any settings before we go and do it for the second one. Okay, so apparently I've set an incorrect property. The value of... And so based on the error message, I realized the mistake that I made. I need to set the operator, change it from equal to data type check. So let's make sure that it is of type integer. What I was trying to do was compare it to another control, which is another function of this same validation control, which we chose not to use this time. So let's go ahead and run this again just to make sure it works. And let's type in like the letter A and or S, and it gives us numbers only, so that seems to work fine. Let's do it one more time now with our number 2 text box, compare validator. Plop it here. We're going to change it to number 2. We will change the type to type integer. Change the operator to data type check. And change the control to validate to txt number 2. Probably should change the error message too, so let's go ahead and do that. Great. Let's give this a shot. Alright, so we'll put an S there and an A here. And we get the appropriate error messages. Let's change them back. And as we change them, notice that the error messages go away and our application works. So that is how you use the validation controls. I hope that this video was helpful, that you see the potential in how easy it is to create web applications using web forms. Good luck. Thanks.